You hear the silk tearing before you see the blood. Dawn hasn't broken yet, but the tent is already thick with the smell of fierce wet, incense, and something metallic that makes your throat close. The woman kneeling before you isn't crying anymore. Her hands, bound with horsehair rope, have gone numb. Beside her, a man who conquered cities now waits for a death he cannot escape. And somewhere beyond these felt walls, 500 women hold their breath, knowing that what happens next will decide whether any of them will ever feel safe again. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching this from. It honestly amazes me how a story this dark from so long ago still reaches people everywhere. This is the winter of 1220, deep in the Mongolian steppes. Inside the private world of Genghis Khan, not the battlefield legend you've heard about, but the man who built something far more disturbing than an empire. He built a system, a machine designed to control the one thing that had once been stolen from him, intimacy itself. And on this morning, that machine is about to devour two of its own. The story begins not with conquest, but with loss. 23 years earlier, a young warrior named Temujin, not yet Khan, not yet legend, had watched from tall grass as raiders took his wife. Her name was Bert. She was 16. The men who dragged her onto their horses were merchants, and they took her to settle an old blood debt Temujin's father owed. For 8 months, she vanished into their camps. And for 8 months, the boy who would become Genghis Khan learned a lesson that would poison everything he would ever build. Love was chaos, and chaos was the enemy. When he got her back through blood, through alliances he had no right to ask for. Through a rescue mission that left valleys burning, Bert was pregnant. The child couldn't have been his. Everyone knew it. No one said it. Temujin named the boy Joki, meaning guest, and raised him as his eldest son. But the doubt never died. It lived in sideways glances, in whispered conversations that stopped when Joki entered a room, in the way his father's love always felt like it was being measured on a scale that could tip toward execution at any moment. That trauma, that 8-month theft, became the blueprint for everything. Genghis Khan didn't just conquer nations. He conquered the concept of vulnerability itself. By the time his empire stretched from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea, he had assembled something historians would later discover with stunned horror, a domestic empire of over 500 women, organized into 4 mobile cities, governed by a secret legal code so comprehensive that it regulated not just actions, but proximity, glances, even the tone of voice a woman could use when speaking to a man who wasn't her husband. The yasa, they called it, the law. Written in his own hand, refined over decades, enforced with public executions that became so routine the camp employed full-time executioners. The code covered everything: theft, loyalty, military conduct, but the longest sections, the ones written with obsessive precision, dealt with women, who could touch whom, when, under what circumstances, with what witnesses present. It wasn't protection. It was possession, refined into legal architecture. The logistics alone staggered the imagination. For separate Ordos tent, cities managed like a military campaign. Supply chains tracked not just food and weapons, but silk robes, jewelry, cosmetics, for hundreds of women. Guards rotated in shifts that never ended, their eyes trained not on external enemies, but on internal movements. A wife couldn't leave her tent after sunset without written permission. Women traveled in groups of 3 or more, never pairs, never alone. Every conversation was potentially monitored, every friendship potentially dangerous. Administrators maintained records with bureaucratic precision that would impress modern governments. Pregnancy logs tracked cycles and conception dates. Birth records noted not just names, but bloodlines, rankings, political implications. Each child born expanded the system, exponentially acquiring wet nurses, tutors, expanded quarters, adjusted supply calculations. The machinery of control grew with each conquest, each new wife acquired through victory or alliance, each infant who carried the Khan's blood, or at least his name, and it worked. For years, it worked. The four ordos hummed like a perfectly tuned instrument. Wives were organized by ethnicity Kirat princesses in the eastern section, Nemon nobility to the west, Tangut girls in designated quarters, Merkit women carefully separated from traditional enemies. Each group monitored not just by guards but by each other, creating networks of surveillance where trust became the most dangerous luxury anyone could afford. Children were educated in central schools where princes and daughters of conquered enemies learned together. Their competition carefully monitored to prevent accidents that might disrupt succession. Boys trained in archery and tactics, while instructors reported any signs of unusual ambition. Girls learned weaving and household management, while teachers tracked which ones showed dangerous intelligence or rebellious tendencies. Even childhood became an administrative category, managed and controlled. But systems built on trauma have a flaw. They're brittle. They rely on everyone believing the rules are absolute, that the machine cannot break. And on this particular night, in a storage tent between the eastern and western ordos, two people made a choice that would reveal just how fragile absolute control really was. The man was a general named Belgate. He'd ridden with the Khan since the beginning, survived at the Unification Wars, led cavalry charges that broke Chinese formations, earned scars that mapped the empire's expansion across his back and arms. His wife was Neman nobility, given in marriage to cement an alliance that secured the western territories. They were, by every measure, exactly the kind of stability the system existed to protect. The guards found them just after midnight. Not in an act proximity was enough. The Yasa didn't require evidence of consummation. It required only the possibility, the breach of protocol that suggested intention. They'd been discovered in her cousin's tent, seeking what the records would later call unauthorized comfort, a meeting that started as family conversation and ended with hemp ropes being measured. By dawn, stakes were being driven into frozen ground. By noon, both bodies were swinging in wind that carried their lesson across 500 households. The execution itself followed ritual precision. Hemp ropes measured for slow strangulation long enough to ensure the process would be instructional rather than quick. The Khan, watching from horseback, his face showing less emotion than the wooden execution posts, drums maintaining rhythm while life drained from two people who'd made the mistake of seeking comfort in a world that had criminalized it. The general's death took longer than anyone preferred, his warrior strength turning execution into prolonged struggle. His wife followed her smaller frame, offering less resistance. Throughout it all, the camp's women watched from designated viewing areas, their faces carefully neutral, while internally calculating how this would shift household dynamics, which positions might open, which alliances might need adjustment. Even horror became administrative data in the Khan's world. But that execution was just the prelude. The real crisis was still coming. 3 nights later, different footsteps moved through darkness. These came from the Khan's own tent, moving toward the quarters of his youngest, wife, a Karat girl, 17 years old, married to him for barely 3 months. The shadow that entered her tent wore armor that caught moonlight, and when guards surrounded the structure at dawn, they discovered something that would force the entire system to confront its own contradictions. The man inside was Joki, the Khan's eldest son, the one whose parentage had always been questioned, whose legitimacy hung on his father's public acknowledgement and private doubt. And now he stood accused of the exact crime that had given him birth, touching a woman who belonged to his father. The discovery triggered mechanisms of control that moved with practiced efficiency. Horns sounded across the valley, not the steady rhythm of standard infractions, but sharp staccato bursts that meant crisis within the Khan's own bloodline. Administrators stumbled from tents, clutching record scrolls. The machinery lurched into motion with the specific horror reserved for threats from within. The trial that followed wasn't about justice, it was about succession wrapped in legal theater. The tribunal assembled before dawn in the great judgment tent that squatted between the four. Ordos like a spider at the center of its web. Chagatai, the second son whose bloodline no one questioned, argued for immediate execution. The law makes no exceptions for blood, he said, and everyone heard what he really meant. Remove Joki now, while justification exists. Tolui, the youngest but sharpest, countered with technicalities. Proximity doesn't prove consummation. Shadows don't constitute evidence. Jigade, trying to find middle ground through wine-hazed thinking, suggested exile rather than execution. The brothers argued law, while really debating inheritance, each word carrying double meanings that would echo through generations. Joki himself stood with the dignity of someone already dead. No protests, no explanations. His confession acknowledged entering the tent, acknowledged speaking with the woman, acknowledged violating protocols, but he stopped short of admitting the capital crime. Truth wrapped in technical defense, admission without accepting the elements that meant death, the Carrot Girl's confession mirrored his acknowledging conversation about her homeland, admitting to seeking comfort from isolation, but denying anything the Yasa explicitly forbade. Their stories aligned too perfectly, suggesting either truth or careful coordination. In the Khan's justice system, perfect alignment often meant conspiracy, but it was Bert who changed everything. The first wife, the woman whose kidnapping had started this entire spiral, stood before her husband and invoked an ancient right, the mother's privilege to speak for her son's life. And in that moment, Genghis Khan faced a choice that would define his legacy: acknowledge Bert's standing and, thus acknowledge Joki as his true son, or reject it and confirm every whispered doubt about bloodlines that had festered for 23 years. The silence in the judgment tent became physically painful. Every breath held, every eye watching the Khan's face for the decision that would answer questions poisoning the dynasty since Joki's birth. "Speak," he said. One word, one syllable that acknowledged Bert's privilege and thus Joki's legitimacy. Shagati's face went pale. Tolui nodded, as if confirming a calculation. The succession question that had haunted decades dissolved in a single word. But Bert didn't plead for mercy. She demanded something older than the Yasa, something that predated written law, trial by ordeal, the test of the white stone. Sacred river rocks heated to temperatures that would make iron tools smoke, then held in bare hands for the count of 9. "Let the gods determine truth where human eyes see only shadows," she said. The gods, not the law, would reveal innocence or guilt through divine judgment written in flesh. Traditional step justice, the kind practiced before administrative procedures and written codes. Warriors would face physical tests. heaven would preserve the innocent and destroy the guilty. Simple, primitive, and absolutely binding, it was perhaps the only solution that preserved both the law's authority and the dynasty's stability. The Khan accepted. The tribunal recessed while shamans were summoned, sacred stones gathered, fires built from wood, harvested under specific moon phases. 3 hours of preparation for an ordeal that would last less than a minute, but determined to fates and reshape an empire's understanding of its own laws. At noon, before the assembled empire, the judgment ground filled with witnesses who'd rather be anywhere else but couldn't look away. The sacred stones glowed white-hot in bronze braziers, their surfaces shimmering with heat that warped the air. Shamans chanted in languages older than memory. Guards formed circles within circles. The drums began their ancient rhythm knot, the mechanical beat of execution, but something that reached into bones and blood. Joki approached his brazier first, his warrior's training keeping his stride steady despite what awaited. The carrot girl followed on legs that wanted to run but had nowhere to go. Assistants used iron tongs to lift the stones, the tools immediately smoking where they touched superheated rock. They placed the glowing stones on bronze plates, and the heat radiating outward made nearby witnesses step back. The head shaman raised his staff. When it lowered, both would grasp their stones and hold them for the count of 9. Divine judgment would write its verdict in their flesh. The staff descended like fate itself. Joki's hands moved without hesitation. His fingers closed around the glowing stone, and for a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then his face transformed as his nervous system finally communicated what flesh was experiencing. The smell of burning meat hit the crowd first. His whole body shook with the effort of not releasing the stone. His jaw clenched so tight, observers could hear teeth grinding. The curate girl's scream pierced the air before she even touched her stone. But her hands moved anyway, driven by will stronger than self-preservation. Her fingers wrapped around the glowing rock, and her scream transformed into something beyond human voice. Still, she held on, her body convulsing with each number the shaman counted. 1, 2, 3. Time stretched like heated metal. The smell of burning flesh mixed with something primal that made minds scream warnings. By 4, a guard had fainted. By 5, blood began seeping between their fingers where skin split from heat. At 7, something changed in Joki's posture. The shaking stopped. His eyes opened and focused on something beyond the physical world. Observers would later swear they saw light emanating from him. 8, 9. Release the stones. Both stones dropped simultaneously, hitting bronze plates with sounds like temple bells. The crowd surged forward before guards restored order. Everyone needed to see the burns that would determine life or death. The shamans studied Joki's palm's first flesh, charred and blistered in patterns that would scar permanently. The stone has marked but not consumed. The head shaman announced, "Heaven acknowledges transgression but finds the crime incomplete." The prince lives but carries heaven's warning in his flesh forever. The Karat girl's hands told a different story. The burns were severe but strangely uniform, as if the stone had carefully marked boundaries. Ancient symbols appeared in the burn patterns, whether by divine intervention or coincidence remained unclear. "The stone finds no deception in her words," the shaman declared. "Her hands bear heaven's seal of truth spoken under trial." Both would live. Both bore permanent reminders that even the Khan's blood walked beneath heaven's judgment. But here's what the trial really revealed. The system had cracked. When written law failed, older powers had been invoked. When human judgment proved insufficient, heaven itself had been called to arbitrate. The Yasathat's comprehensive code, designed to eliminate all uncertainty, had shown limits at its highest level. Absolute control had bent to accommodate what it was built to prevent: human complexity, family loyalty, the messy reality that law couldn't fully contain. In the years that followed, Genghis Khan's domestic empire continued its mechanical operations. Guards still patrolled. Women still lived within boundaries defined by statute and fear. But everyone now knew that even absolute systems had limits, that heaven might intervene where human law overreached, and the system's success could be measured in numbers that would stagger future generations. Modern DNA testing would reveal something extraordinary. 16 million men alive today carry white chromosome markers tracing directly to Genghis Khan. 8% of men across the former empire's territories. His 4 sons became genetic amplifiers, spreading chromosomes through their own collections of wives. Grandsons continued the pattern. The ordeal of systematic reproduction achieved what armies couldn't conquest from inside human cells, spreading through 30 generations, touching 500 million humans. The numbers tell one-story history's most successful reproductive strategy, achieved through control that turned intimacy into administrative procedure. But the burns on Joki's hands told another. Even the most comprehensive system couldn't eliminate the human need for connection, couldn't legislate away loneliness, couldn't prevent people from seeking comfort in a world designed to criminalize it. Genghis Khan built his empire to ensure that what was stolen from him could never be stolen again. He created laws, organized cities of women, executed violators with public ceremony, and engineered control so absolute it would echo through centuries in genetic code. But on that winter morning in 1220, when his son's hands closed around superheated stone, the machine revealed its fundamental truth. Humanity kept breaking through, demanding exceptions, requiring mercy the system wasn't designed to provide. The Yasa survived him. It governed the Mongol Empire for generations, spreading across conquered territories, rewriting local customs, shaping legal systems across Asia. But it survived as a compromised Thinga law that claimed absolute authority. While everyone remembered the day heaven intervened because written statute couldn't resolve what the lawgiver's own blood demanded. Those execution stakes stood for 7 days. The scars lasted a lifetime, and the question remains whether any system built from trauma can ever truly heal.